Drivers, start your engine!
Good evening, race fans. Welcome to the Lucas Radio Network, and welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we wrap up 2022 in racing. This is our last show of the year. We'll be back with you round about Rolex 24 time. But tonight I've got Louise and Richard joining me as always, and I've also got my good friend Mark Dill, author and race historian, who's got a new project that I want to hear a little more about. So, Mark, thank you for joining us tonight. So, Mark is the author of Legend of the First Superspeedway, which is a book that's, how long has that book been out? It's
A year.
About a year, right? So now you've written a companion book to it, aimed at young people. I know you have young grandchildren, so writing a children's book probably seemed like something really fun to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, clearly I've got one grandson and he's crazy about cars from the day he was born. I mean, seriously, that kid probably the 10th, and one of the top 10 words, first 10 words he spoke was cars. And so, I didn't brainwash him. He came out into the world with that attitude, and that's wonderful. And I've enjoyed it. In fact, he attended his first Indy 500, 5 years old, first Indy 500 this past May. And I also attended, and it was my 50th. So
wow.
We bookended that one.
Nice. So let's talk about the new book. I know a lot of what you've written in the past goes into some great detail. Does a lot of research. So how did you what was the process like to just try to, I don't know what the word is, try to simplify all the stuff so it's easy for a child to understand, but at the same time be very informative?
Yeah, I had a couple of people who knew me and had read the book that were, good friends, and when I told them I was finishing up a child's edition of the same subject, like, well, how are you going to do that? And I was like, I don't know. I just sat down and started writing it, and I also got some advice from my daughter, who is a psychologist, and she has her own practice, and she's had a lot of experience in child development. So I put the manuscript in front of her, and she critiqued it. I wasn't too far off, but she gave me a lot of helpful tips. And I took the essential story. It's almost like the executive summary, but it's written in kid-friendly terms of the book. And, there are occasional, there's language in there that you wouldn't say to a child. There's suggestive situations that the boys in the book get themselves into, because that's what they actually did. And so I wanted to tell that story to adult readers, but for the kids, it's really a book about being determined and self-confident and believing in yourself to pursue something. And I think, in particular, my two favorite characters, Barney Oldfield and Carl Fisher, are prime examples of that. I mean, they took a lot of guff from a lot of people, and they just kept their heads down and kept going. And look what happened. I mean, Speedway is the most famous, certainly in America, and still holds this mega sporting event every May.
I mean, yeah, that's a wonderful lesson for any child to, say that if you are determined and work hard, your dreams can come true. So that's I think that's really wonderful that you're putting that message out there. Now, obviously, with a child's book, I'm sure you've worked with an illustrator.
Yeah, and thank you, Mary Lynn Smith, who's a young lady, was in my daughter's social circle, and we worked out a deal with her, and it's really just in terms of revenue share. And this is her first children's book, and so she was excited to put this on her resume. And all the feedback I've gotten from her work is very, very much full of praise. And we certainly were very happy with it. My wife and I, who also was a big help. Mary Beth, we didn't have to go through too many cycles on the illustrations. There were a couple that I thought didn't quite, demonstrate or portray the time period. So we asked her to make some changes, and she did, and the result's excellent. So I think that that's the kind of thing that draws children in. And the book is really written for probably kids 7 to 9, just to be able to just sit down and read it themselves. But it's also a great book for, I'm going to do a reading, I think, next week to my grandson's kindergarten class. And they're all excited, and they're putting it in their library, and I'm very pleased with that. And I think that when you're reading the book to younger kids who haven't really begun to read yet, the illustrations are particularly important because you can talk to the illustrations. You don't have to encourage them to find the patience to listen to you read, but you can take page by page and explain what's going on. And I think the illustrations are such that they'll draw the kids in.
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, I was introduced to auto racing at a very young age. I have my family owns a race team. My uncle's a race car driver, still is. He's been going since I want to say Maloney Racing is established 1967, and that's the same year I was born. So I've been around it forever, and I loved it as a little kid, and I loved everything about it. I like to build model cars, play with Matchbox cars, all those sort of things. But I was really big into the books, you know what I mean? And because my uncle had a large collection of books, and I would largely look at the pictures. So, but there really wasn't anything out there that was kind of written towards 7 to 9 year old when I was young. There may have been, but it wasn't there. So I think that's a really wonderful thing you're doing. So with that being said, how are the sales of your current book, the original book, The Legend of the First Superspeedway? I believe that you're on a second edition already. Is that correct?
No, not a second edition. We're talking about doing that, and this time come back with some, sections, as you find in a lot of books, of photographs. All the images, believe it or not, that are in the original book were images I found on library microfilm as I ruined my eyesight sifting through years and years and years. And I would digitize those things and clean them up a little bit. And I call them image artifacts, but in many cases, those original photos don't exist anymore. So the only record that the photo was ever taken is in the microfilm. And I put a lot of that, as you know, on my firstsuperspeedway.com site. And I think the photo, and I had a couple of people ask me about this, getting photos from like the Henry Ford or the Speedway Museum or some other sources, and having sections of pictures. So that's what we're looking at for a second edition of the original book. And as far as sales go, I didn't do it to put kids through college. That's already been done. But we have more than broke even on that. And we're probably inching up close to around 8,000 books sold. And, for an independent author with, with his first book, I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, it sounds like it's gone over pretty well. I mean, I know you're very adamant about promoting it. I see, you've got your own Facebook group, Legend of the First Superspeedway group. You've got a lot of folks in there. You guys have a lot of great discussions about the early days. And there are a lot of folks who would just really enjoy the history of the sport as well as the current sport. And yeah, again, I think it's important for us to remember the history and know how it started and when it started and who were the movers and shakers in the early days. So I really appreciate what the sort of things you're doing here, keeping that alive, digitizing those photos that otherwise nobody may ever have seen.
That's right.
Especially some of those old newspaper photos, which is, most of those are public domain, but they don't, like you said, they don't exist until you dig them up and clean them up and then share them to a whole new generation. And some of your stuff is, more than 100 years old.
Oh yeah, easily. I mean,
yeah.
I go back into the 1890s, not a lot of that decade, but a little bit. And, a lot of it is, it spans the book. I mean, the really old stuff is, roughly 1902 to 1910. And, time flies. That's, 120 years now. And I do want to make a point, since you brought that up, and I think I haven't communicated it effectively, but what the subtitle of my original book was the Battle for the Soul of American Auto Racing. And I feel like, and I haven't seen anybody else do this, and I hope that doesn't sound arrogant, but to connect the dots of all the salient events that were going on up to the construction and the brick paving of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in the United States. And it was a culture war. The Eastern establishment were Eurocentric, and that's where the AAA was. And they viewed those in the West, and in that case, in those days, Indiana was the West. It was derisively, people out there were referred to as Westerners. That was not a compliment. And who are these yahoos running around on these dirt horse track ovals? And what are they doing? And their cars are kind of junky. We've got Mercedes and Fiat and Panhard and Dirac. Europeans were light years ahead of the Americans, but the Americans out in the Midwest were, pretty determined, and they eventually built cars that could compete with the Europeans. And so this culture war that was going on, there was a real push to eliminate oval track racing in 1905. And it nearly happened. And Carl Fisher once said that Barney Oldfield had carried oval track racing, and they just called it track racing back then, on his back almost single-handedly. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. So there's all these dots are connected, and I'm not sure how many people, I haven't seen anybody else talk about this. And I think it's a good insight that should be provocative to people that are enthusiasts about the sport and its history. And I also feel like, how can you really love the sport if you don't know its history? The Indy 500, for example, still rides on the momentum that Carl Fisher and his partners created way back in 1909. It just it wouldn't have the significance it has today without that history. And so I like to give tribute to those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if it hadn't been such an event before, the world wars, nobody might have picked it up after the fact.
That's right.
Holman wanted to bring something back that was very special. And that was the second birth of the Speedway there. So,
yeah. I mean, you get to that mid-century, and a lot, the automobile business in Indiana had largely been decimated. Everything was concentrated in Detroit, and Indianapolis in particular had been this robust high-tech center, not unlike, there's an analogy to Silicon Valley in those very early days. And everybody was jumping around job to job, and there was roughly 20 car manufacturers in Indy, and all of that was gone or pretty much all of it was gone by the mid-century. So you look at a guy like Tony Holman and, of course, Wilbur Shaw, they recognized that the one big thing Indiana had at that point in time was the Indy 500. And without that, it was, nothing wrong with growing corn, but that would be about the only action.
True. Nothing wrong with growing corn. That's funny, Mark. I like that.
I like corn.
Yeah, so do I. Yeah. Now, Richard, Louise, you have anything you want to ask Mark about?
Yeah, I was going to briefly mention the Hoosiers, but that's more of a certain age group doing the sport. Like that's more or less everybody else are not. You have a valid point about the corn thing. So good thing you mentioned that before I said something about basketball or football related, as far as the state of Indiana, what they had, as far as people actually doing stuff or more investment on it. But no, the question that I have, honestly, you mentioned about the illustration aspect. When it comes to word choices, explaining things obviously from a big, elaborate historical book to a children's book, how does an author go through that transition to try to make it informative yet for an age group like children?
Yeah, I don't want to say it was easy, but I didn't agonize over it as much as I thought I would when I started. And obviously I know the story, and the two books, it's basically the same story, but obviously the children's book is delivered at a level that would engage kids and also teach them. I mean, this is history, not just of racing and cars, but just American history. And I just tried to think like basically a third grader, and just always be cognizant of who my audience was. And you really be letting them down if you if you didn't have the right vocabulary and the right messages. And I think the pictures are so important, because kids react to that, and that's what draws them into the words. They want to know, well, what's that picture? What is the story behind that picture? And so if they're intrigued enough, they'll sit and listen. And I guess I'm rambling, but I just tried to think like a third grader, which for a guy like me, that probably isn't that tough.
Yeah, I would imagine that it's a really fine line between trying to get the right vocabulary to young people to where you don't feel like you're talking down to them. Yeah. You've got to make it so. And I admire anybody that can do that. I've written things for years, but I've never really been able to write effectively for children. So, by all accounts, your book has turned out really well. I wish you well with the reading. And Richard, did you have anything to jump in with, or?
I think it's interesting, and you touched on it a little bit there. This, excuse me, as much as we, as motorsport fans, sort of follow, the Indy 500 or whatever sporting event it may be, the Indy 500 really has defined a city and a state for probably the last 100 years or so. And, probably more so, I can't think of many other cities that are so closely identified to a single sporting event as Indianapolis, really. Others are, obviously, renowned for their teams per se, but an actual event, I struggle, in North America anyway, to correlate an event and a city in such a close way that's defined the history of the city, for the last 100 years.
That's a good comment, and I'd say the closest is the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah.
But yeah, and if I can just add a thought, that it may sound like some overreach, but I would like to encourage more people to do things like this, because I don't think there's enough product aimed at engaging youngsters in the sport. And we all love the sport, and we want it to grow and be healthy into the future. And I get concerned. I mean, basically, there's only about 40,000 ticket purchasers for the Indy 500. They buy in multiples and share with their family. And so when you really look at it, you can see a vulnerability there. And we just need to get more kids, more young people excited about it. And more than just coming to a party. Party's great, but give yourself some substance, something you can sink your teeth into, and laying that foundation. Frank, I didn't come from a racing family. I was born in Indianapolis, and there was just something, my family was so about it. I just, everybody in Indy paid attention, because it was, as you were saying, just about the only game in town at that time. And I just was enthralled in it, and I drew my parents into it because they were, wanting to know what I was so excited about, and took it from there. So, but whatever sparks that kid, that's crucial to growing the sport.
Oh, you're absolutely right, Mark. Now, before we let you go, because I know you've your wife's making you dinner, so I do want you to go ahead and let us know where both your books can be purchased.
Okay. All right. Well, you go to markgdill.com, and I have autographed copies there, both books. And frankly, I make a bigger profit from people who purchase on my site. But you can also get it at the major retailers like Amazon, which it seems everybody defaults to, but also Target, Walmart, Barnes and Noble. So those are the likely suspects. And I've had a lot of nice reviews on Amazon. I really appreciate. And that's how you get a hold of one.
All right. So Mark G. Dill, DILL.com is where you'll be able to go ahead and buy that. So, Jeff Bezos has enough money to go to Mars. So Mark could use it to get the grandchild into college. So,
absolutely. And we've you can get access to a store we've done with the company called Spreadshirt. And we have First Superspeedway, Legend of First Superspeedway apparel and accessories, mugs, pint glass. So I think that's really cool. We just started selling that kind of gear, if you will, using the children's book art. The original with our logo is still very much evident in the store, but now we've got these. Back when I go to my grandson's kindergarten class to read, he's going to wear a T-shirt with the Blitz and Benz, the same image that's on the back of the book.
Oh, nice. That'll be fun. All right, Mark. Well, listen, I want to wish you the best of holidays to you and your family. I want to wish you the best with the new book. But I really want to thank you for coming on. I always enjoy listening to anybody that's so engaged in the past of the sport. So so once we get up and rolling next season, we'll have you on again sometime and chat about how things are going and what your next project might be.
Well, it's good because I am working on one, and I also want to thank you, Frank, for being active on. You mentioned the First Superspeedway group Facebook page. You've made some excellent contributions, and so I just always appreciate your good humor and your friendship, and it's an honor to be on your show.
All right. Well, thank you so much, my friend. All right. We'll talk soon. Have a great night.
You too. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Yep. Same to you. All right, fellas. So we did have one more race before the season ended up, Formula One. Another win for Max. And as we speculated, Lewis Hamilton went winless and finished a dismal 6th in the championship. So I don't think even our bold predictions from last year would have amounted to that. Yeah, it would have been that bold. Yeah. So, so I tell you, So Richard, take us through the final Grand Prix of the year, and then we'll start our wrap up of the year in total.
Yep. So return to Abu Dhabi a year on from a pretty controversial culmination of the 2021 championship, and this was obviously everything was all sewn up and signed, sealed, and delivered to Max and Red Bull to win both championships. A couple of little subplots going on, the battle between Checo and Charles to get that second place, both tied on points going into the weekend. Throughout practice and qualifying, the Red Bull slowly gained momentum and traction throughout the weekend, and Max ended up taking a dominant pole position by almost a quarter of a second, which is probably the largest margin of the year. I think in some ways it was, without knowing the numbers, they've been pretty close in qualifying this year, and he sort of dominated that one to a greater extent. But it was pretty much the Max show throughout the whole race. He was never really under any difficulty. He did his thing. It was a very, I think Martin Brundle during the commentary describes it as a Schumacher-esque race, and I think in many ways it was. He just, the slower he tried to go, the quicker he went, sort of thing, which I know is an oxymoron in a way, but he just did a great job. He was all over it, and you got to give credit where credit's due. Max had a fantastic season and a fantastic race, and the whole Red Bull performance post summer break to win all bar one race was dominant and very, very impressive. So you can't really knock them too hard for on that. They did a job and they did it incredibly well. Couple of little other things going back in the background. Charles drove a great race on a one-stop strategy to pit Checo there to the second place in the standings, which probably I think were deserved. I think Charles has been, on top of his game all year. Ferrari obviously have had some strategy issues per se, and maybe not executed in the way that they would have liked at times. Whereas I think Checo maybe has just been off his game for some races. He was pretty good at the start of the year, then they announced that multi-year contract extension, and he sort of went missing for sort of the second or the third quarter of the season. He sort of dropped off a little bit, but then came back strong towards the end of the year there with a win. I think he won in, was it Singapore, wasn't it? And
Yep.
had a couple of other good results. So he came back strong, which I think he needed to, because there would have been some fingers, and questions asked if he'd struggled at that much, having announced that long-term contract or relatively long-term contract extension. So I think, all things being equal, I think Charles probably did just about deserve that second place, and it was a fantastic race to do the race in a one-stop strategy. For a change, a good call on the strategy side by Ferrari, and they did a great job there. A couple of final races, potentially for good. Others maybe not so much. Starting, at the back, Nicholas Latifi had his final race for Williams. Not a particularly stellar career, should we say? Obviously there's a lot of financial reward for Williams to run Nicholas over the last 3 years, and he did a good job. He did a solid job. Didn't dig up any trees, didn't do anything amazing, but did what he needed to do at times, and he brought some money into the team through the takeover period, with Dalton Capital coming in, and he did okay. But come the first race of the next year, I hate to say it, but people will forget who he was. In the nicest possible way. Mick Schumacher's final race for Haas, which was a little bit clumsy there. He did tangle with Latifi in 3/4 of the way through the race there, and that was a little bit clumsy. But Mick's done okay. You look back through Mick's history, he's always been a slow starter, but once he gets going, he's done pretty well. And he wasn't terrible, but the problem is he was up against a genuine teammate this year in Kevin Magnussen, and at times was just a little bit off the pace, and had a couple of those big accidents early in the year in Saudi Arabia and Monaco, and obviously that has an impact financially on a team like Haas, and he was always on the back foot there, and he just didn't have enough stellar moments to really, I think, solidify his claim to that seat, unfortunately. And I think he'll get a reserve driver role somewhere, potentially come back at some point. I hope he does, because I think there is a little bit more there than maybe his performances at Haas have shown. I think Haas is a particularly harsh environment to be in for a young driver. I think as much as we love the Gunterisms, if you like, that we see in social media, I think Gunter can be pretty harsh on people, and I think maybe Mick is one of those guys that needs a bit of an arm around his shoulder and a bit of encouragement and a bit of guidance there. Maybe he didn't get that at the Haas. And then the other two, potentially final races, Daniel Ricciardo's final race for McLaren. After 2 years of a 3-year contract, stepping away for at least a year, he's very vocal in that he wants to return. Looks like he's going to be a reserve driver, simulator driver for the Red Bull racing team in 2023. And but ironically, a really good race, solid race from him again. He got a P9, I think he finished, but a good battling driver. And it just, for whatever reason, maybe it's this new car, maybe it's whatever, it just hasn't quite clicked for Daniel Ricciardo. And I think as a personality and as somebody that lifts the team and brings a good environment to a team, I think he's second to none on the grid in many, many ways. But hopefully he'll come back, because he's definitely got something about him, and he deserves a drive. Does he want to be in a back marker team? Probably not. He probably deserves a little bit better, but the way the cards fell this year in the silly season, the driver market, it just didn't play out. But of course, the big one, the big farewell, if you like, was to Sebastian Vettel.
And absolutely, and Formula One went all out, and it was wonderful to watch all the outpouring of just admiration for this guy who's done so much for the sport. Yeah, it was really it was like he went out with a bang, a lot of flair.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed watching all this.
Yeah, I mean, Seb's 35. He's had a good career. Since making his debut for BMW Sauber, stepping in for Robert Kubica post kind of 2007, I think it was, when he had that big accident. And Red Bull snapped him up pretty quickly from underneath BMW's nose. And he's had a great career. There's 4 world championships in the early 2010s in a dominant car, but you can only do so much. You can only do what you need to do. And then, of course, he made the decision to step away and go to Ferrari, and it never quite clicked from there. Had shots at the championship, had an opportunity, but never really. The typical Ferrari, there was just that one step behind where Mercedes were through that turbo hybrid area, or the majority of that hybrid era. And then, of course, Ferrari obviously were looking at how much they were paying him, how much they could pick up somebody like Carlos Sainz for, which was undoubtedly less money. And Carlos Sainz is a solid driver, and they made the call to move Seb on, and he's found a home. He found a home at Aston Martin, which was a surprise to people, I think. But in a way, it sort of rejuvenated him as a person as much as a driver. I think the politics of Ferrari can be very, very harsh on drivers, especially when you're not part of the family in the same way that maybe Michael Schumacher was or Charles Leclerc is. They're ingrained in Ferrari folklore, through the driver development program and just through, Schumacher's stature. Seb never was really there, but he tried very hard. He was one of the guys that learned Italian. He got on well with the team. He got on well with his engineers and mechanics, but seeing him in the last 2 years at Aston Martin, he was obvious. They were never in a car to compete for wins and podiums and pole positions and the like. But you could just see that he was happier there. He had all that weight of expectation taken off his shoulders, and he drove fantastically at times, especially post-retirement announcement. Since he announced that he was going to retire, he drove fantastically. You cannot take anything away from him. The way he's driven the second or the final third of the season has been phenomenal. I don't think you can say it any other way. And it's a real shame that he's going. Will he go? Will he be back? Hamilton said that he thinks he will come back. Alonso said he thinks he'll come back, and maybe he will. He said he wants to spend time with his family. He's got a young child now, and he's been married for a while. And he said, look, I've been doing this, running around the world, every other weekend for almost 15 years now, and now it's my wife's turn to do something, and he wants to support her, which is fantastic. But
I'm sure he's got a couple dollars in the bank that he can let his wife
have a fun.
But
I really do think I do think he will come back in one form or another. Whether it is as a driver, I'd like to see, because I still think has a lot to offer. Would it be as a working for like filling that void that Dieter Matterschmitz has left at Red Bull? Helmut Marko is not a young man. Could Seb step into that void, or even maybe be looked at? Mercedes to take him on to fill that Niki Lauda role, which they've never really done since Niki's passing a few years back. That could be an opportunity for Seb. But the other thing you've got to look at is, somebody needs to see if the guy's got an American birth certificate, because he would make a great politician. And he's actually appeared. He's actually appeared on Question Time, which is a British political panel program. Not a comedy, not a magazine show. This is real. They get politicians and activists, and this is real serious business. And Seb was on there earlier this year, and not only was he on a political panel show, but he was on a political panel show with a, you know, in a tongue that wasn't his first native language, you know, and he was fantastic on it. So he, you know, I really do think, you know, that could be a route. He's got so many options available to him. From a sort of selfish perspective, I would like to see him back in a race car and competing there. But whatever he does, you know, Seb will be very, very influential and be a voice of reason, I think, which he's proven over the last couple of years as he's matured and grown. And yeah, undoubtedly a real loss, and it was really sad to see him step away. But you know, whatever he does, it's going to be great, and we you know, we hope that it will impact, you know, motorsport in a positive way. But yeah, good luck to him.
Yeah, I want to say he's, you know, off the track, he's done a lot of, you know, kind of philanthropy work, and you know, there's a lot of just, you know, drawing awareness to causes that he feels need awareness drawn to them. You know, he was very he was right there with Lewis on the Black Lives Matter. He's the whole the pride thing, you know, supporting that, and he's just and like you say, he's an influential guy who, when he speaks, he's not speaking. He really knows what he's talking about. You know,
Yeah,
he's a very informed individual with some strong viewpoints. And yeah, to your point, he'd make a great politician. But yeah, I'd love to see him back in racing in some shape or form, whether it be a you know, administrative role with a team, a driver's coach, or something like that. But yeah, I'd love to see him in a race car. You know, even you
know, put him in the FIA.
Yeah,
you know, put him in there.
Oh, you know, good Lord! Yeah, let him. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of guys that have taken roles on like that. Jackie Eakes comes to mind. You know, took a role as an official with the FIA after his driving career, and of course you had the aforementioned Niki Lauda had an administrative role with Mercedes. So there's the opportunities there, but I feel like we'll see Seb just take a couple of years to himself and his family. But you know as well as I do, there's a lot of the old timers in the sport that when they walk away, something draws them back, because that
I mean, you know,
that motor racing is in your blood, right?
If you want to pick somebody that you put in, you personally, I'll put in my top 5 drivers of 2022, it'd be Fernando Alonso. You know, at 41 now, to my mind, he's driven as well as he ever has done in the last 10 years, especially. You know, obviously the championship years maybe, you know, but you know, since he had that, you know, shot in 2012 with Ferrari, I think he's driving now better than he ever has done. And, you know, he's shown that if you have that X factor, for want of a better word, that I would say half a dozen of the guys out there do have, you know, the Sebs, the Fernandos, Lewis, Kimi to a certain extent had it. You know, those are the guys that can push the envelope of performance a little bit further than most, because, yeah, age catches up on them with certain aspects of their driving, but their, you know, their other senses and their other skills more than make up for what they may lose. I mean, you look at, you know, it wasn't the most successful return, you know, for Michael Schumacher, but he actually, his final year, to my mind, at 2012, he drove great. You know, he drove really, really well that final year of his 3-year comeback. And, you know, there's a lot to be said about it. And I think you know, the teams are starting to understand the experience of guys like Fernando and like Seb, you know, have a huge, huge benefit to the organization moving forward.
Yeah, you've got to give Schumacher a little credit for Hamilton's future success.
Oh, for sure.
There with Mercedes, because, you know, Michael laid the groundwork.
Yeah.
And you know, Lewis, I don't want to say, you know, Lewis didn't do any development work on his own, but he certainly reaped the benefits of Michael getting the groundwork laid in there, you know.
But if you want to, you know, look at, you know, just dropping back to Seb very quickly, the mark of a man, you know, obviously he had all the post-race ceremony and, you know, all the adulation and all the interviews and all the press and everything like that. But after he'd done that, he goes back into the motorhome and debriefs for 3 hours with his engineers on the race. You know, there's no, you didn't have to do that. You could have just said, right, see you guys, I'm off, bye. But no, he was professional to the end, and I don't think you could ever, obviously as he's, when he was younger, he had his moments, but I think as he's matured and grown into it, he really, more so to my mind than anybody else active, knows what it means to be a Formula One driver, and he's fulfilled that obligation better than most.
Absolutely, yeah. So now, I mean, the next question, obviously, since we're talking about these guys that have been around, Alonso moving to Aston Martin next year.
Yep.
What is, what does that look like? That's going to be, because obviously Seb elevated that team from where they were a year ago or 2 years ago. So now that you're getting Fernando in there, who, again, like you said, is driving like a man, 20 years his junior.
Yeah.
So you got to wonder, do these guys kind of push their way up to, around, like the mid-pack teams and get themselves to that number 3 spot there, number 3, number 4?
I mean, it is difficult because, Formula One, more so than most sports, is very much team driven. That's your limiting factor, is your car performance. You can't take a 5th or 6th place car in terms of performance and take it from 10th on the grid to 2nd or 3rd on the grid. You could maybe take a car that's, an average of 10th place qualifying and make it a 7th place or an 8th place qualifying. So you're not going to see these like gargantuan jumps and leaps in performance, but it's a cultural thing, it's a work ethic thing, it's a momentum thing. You mentioned the work that Michael had obviously done at Mercedes to help grow that team, and I'll put Ross Brawn into that equation as well. Everything that both Michael and Ross, those foundations that they laid in early 2010 and 11 and 12, had a huge impact in the growth of that team, and that's what guys like Seb and Fernando can bring to these organizations. The methodology and the way of working and the focal point of everybody's attention, because there's so many people that work in these teams now, and I've been in them, and it has happened. You lose the attention, you lose the what's the word, the philosophy, the goal, because you don't have that figure. And I think that's where Seb definitely over the last couple of years has really helped Aston Martin, because no disrespect to Lance Stroll, he was never that guy. And in the same breath, Fernando will go in there, and I think what you'll see is the performance. Again, not being overly critical, but I think again you'll see through 2023 and beyond that Lance just is not a guy that can lead a team. And this isn't being disrespectful; it's being factual. He cannot lead a Formula One team to where his dad wants them to be. He wants to build a Mercedes-like legacy. Well, sorry, as much as you don't want to hear it, Lance ain't that guy. And but then to the same extent, you can't keep picking the Sebs and the Fernandos. At some point, if with the new facility that they're building at Silverstone and the recruitment that they've made with some of the engineers, it's just been very aggressive. At some point you've got to go, right, we need a Leclerc or a Russell or somebody that is going to be here for 5 to 8 years as a driver, and he's going to take us from being at the top of the mid pack and push us through and get us into that championship winning position. And Lance isn't that guy. Fundamentally,
no, but I mean, Leclerc certainly, you mentioned, could do that. Even I would say Lando Norris would be another.
Yeah, Lando.
If you're talking about like a long-term guy, and George Russell, of course, but those guys are all in pretty good situations where they're at.
Yeah.
So for so I mean, it's like, what's next after Fernando leaves? Are they gonna go ahead and coax Lewis out of retirement after he finishes up with Mercedes? You know what I mean? So
get Kimmy on the phone.
Hey, Kimmy's have helmet will travel. So, but yeah. So anyway, so let's move on from talking about Formula One. We do want to get some of our wrap up for the rest of the year. So Louise, you've been quiet over there.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
wanting to mention about how Ferrari didn't blow their opportunity when they had in front of them. They did something that Argentina couldn't. But that's the different topic for another time.
Yeah,
The
we'll
World
say
Cup
we'll save
podcast.
that. Yeah, we'll save that for a World Cup podcast. Yeah. So let me ask you this, Louise, while we're still kind of Formula One thought fresh in our memory, right? So you're a big fan of Checo. I know that. And between the animosity between him and Max and the hiring of Daniel Ricciardo as a reserve driver, do you think Checo has anything to be worried about in as far as if he doesn't, if he has a couple of bad races that they'll put Daniel in a car? You foresee that happening at all, or do you feel like he's relatively safe?
For now, he's relatively safe.
Well, yeah, it's the off season.
Yeah. When we get to the season, he can't have his mid-season skid at all. Cannot. In his eyes, he's better going to be better going to that mindset that he better not and will not go through a skid, because the fact that he did something that should acclimate him really well, keep doing a different tire strategy. He knows how to conserve it. The fact that came up sure wasn't necessarily ideal or great in the eyes of him or Red Bull to get second, because that still remains elusive to them. And he needs just to get off to that strong start like he did at the beginning of the year and stay that way. Otherwise, Ricciardo will be knocking on the door, like I said. Even though I still stand, what happened in Interlagos was more or less that he just lost pace. He just did not have the speed. And that's why Ferrari and Alonso were able to get by him at the very end of the race. That's how I'll look back at the whole Interlagos thing, not this whole thing about Verstappen not letting him go, this and that, which has been more clear that it was more of a miscommunication and just not well planned out.
Right. So, all right. So let's recap a little bit of 2022 while we're here, right? And Louise, I'll start with you just because you've been quiet over there, and that's usually the line I deliver to Richard.
I know.
So, but I know, right? But
you should be honored, Louise. There you go.
Sure.
So, I mean, looking back at the season as a whole, all the series, what do you feel like the biggest surprise was?
I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna say Trackhouse Racing's emergence, because at the very beginning of the year, I made this NASCAR prediction video that I'm still holding off doing a reaction of. I said that Trackhouse Racing will not be one of the new winners in the Cup Series. I thought they're going to be close. They're going to get better. But wins were not on my radar for either Daniel Suarez or Ross Chastain. Lo and behold, Chastain ended up winning 2 races and pretty much the story of the year at Martinsville. And then Daniel Suarez winning at Sonoma, where he was knocking at that door for a while. Was not necessarily expected to happen at Sonoma to get his maiden win. And, of course, Chastain making it to the championship 4. Obviously, didn't win the championship, but both cars finishing in the top 10 of points was to be the biggest surprise of the year at a positive light. Then on a negative end, again, the inconsistency and incompetence of Andretti Autosport. They should be fighting for championships and wins on a much more consistent basis, but this season they just have been off. Even Herta was off compared to the past couple of years, where people wonder why he doesn't have a Formula One ride or why does he have super license. You just look back at this past season alone, and you'll understand why. It's the harsh reality of it.
Yeah, I think
not consistent enough.
Yeah, that whole team is in a bit of disarray. Because people had high hopes for Grosjean going in as an Andretti driver, right?
Yeah, he looked great at Long Beach.
Yeah, people predicted race wins for Grosjean, and that failed to happen. Rossi finally put a win in the books after couple of winless seasons, right? Herta only won once. Did Herta win once or twice?
I think he
He
won.
He won the Indy GP.
I think
Again.
that was it.
I think that was it. Yeah.
He didn't win Laguna, did he?
No, that was Palou.
No. Palou.
Yeah.
Palou won. Yeah, Palou nearly won winless till he won. Yeah. So the Andretti team has got some work to do. And again, we've talked about this, and I really want to say Michael's whole bid to get him a Formula One team has just distracted him from being the go-to guy for the IndyCar team. Or just the size of his racing empire. You know what I mean? So I think, it's like Penske can step away from his organization, right? Say, I've got to run the Speedway and the series, right? And Tim Cindric, you're in charge, right? Well, one little year.
There's one poor year, wasn't there?
Yeah, one poor year, but not horrible. But then this year they come back and they've got, a Newgarden with 5 wins, McLaughlin with 3 wins, Will Power with a championship. With Penske being hands off, right? So, and that's, golly, Tim Cindric, again, one of the most brilliant men I've ever had a chance to sit and talk with. But Michael lacks a guy like that to step up when he's not hands on. And that's what I think it boils down to. I mean, other people say, it boils down to they're not. They don't have the engineering staff that Penske or Ganassi does or whatever. And it could be a combination of all that. But
who's responsible for hiring those people?
Exactly. That's exactly where I was going with that.
Yeah, I was going to say, last time I checked, I don't see people going for Andretti members. They've been going outside of or internally. I mean, look at Penske. Some of Penske are going to McLaren now.
Yeah, Andretti got to be careful because they're gonna slip behind McLaren and even Rahal Letterman.
I was gonna say Andretti's recruiting. My mind is behind.
I feel like they might be already.
McLaren right now. Yeah, I think Andretti's behind McLaren right now. And
yep.
Yeah, I think it's solidly. If you ask me what the pecking order was, is Penske, Ganassi, McLaren, Andretti, and then next up would be Rahal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be curious to see how McLaren does because obviously Felix had a full year this time compared to last year where he missed about a race or two, and he actually had a quietly but good season this past year. So I'll be curious to see how much momentum will that carry into 2023 for him. There was that period of time where it looked like he might have been borderline not be with that team.
Oh yeah. He was definitely looking at Formula E, until the whole Palou thing imploded. But I'm really interested to see how Rossi performs with McLaren. I wonder if a change of scenery will just suit him quite well, and he'll be back to the Rossi that we saw in 2017 and 2018, where he was a threat to win the championship. That's
it's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, it really be. But he's got some stiff competition amongst his own teammates between Pato, who we know is good. Felix is a very technical driver, and he can do well. So it'd be interesting to see how the expansion of 3 cars either helps or hurts McLaren. It could go either way, but I'm really interested to see what 2023 fortunes come to Rossi because there are guys that about to write him off after
he's on his last chance to learn, isn't he?
More or less, yeah. So
he doesn't have many more opportunities to not deliver, should we say, than he's had in the last 3 or 4 years. So yeah, it'll be interesting. Man, you were doing the preview show now, aren't we?
Yeah, more or less, yeah. So all right. So let's
but recap, surprise in a good way, Trackhouse Racing, surprise in a bad way, Andretti Autosport for those who are keeping score.
All right. So for you, Richard, then your biggest surprise and your biggest disappointment. Or I'd call it disappointment or just the shocker of the bad surprise. Happy surprise, bad surprise.
I think the disappointment to pick on Luis there, Andretti, and again, I've been very critical of him on the show, but Colton Herder, I think again, we all know his talent, but God, he's got to do better. That's my disappointment. I'd also put Kyle Larson not being in the championship in the Cup Series as a disappointment, a surprise. Kyle Busch's lackluster performance at and moving to Childress. I mean, goodness me, I think if you told us all that 12 months ago, you'd have thought we'd been on the smoking some herbal remedy or something, because that is nobody saw that one coming. But the sort of feel good performance, I think. There's been a number, hasn't there? Again, Trackhouse again was great. The performance, I think McLaren, I think we mentioned there, they had in the IndyCar side they were great. There's been a few, but there hasn't been really many that have massively stood out. I think George winning his first race was a huge boost for the sport. He deserved that, and he's beating Lewis. I mean, goodness me, in his first year in the team. Yes, admittedly, the car wasn't where they wanted it to be, so there's a lot of caveats there to Lewis's performance. But I think that's got to be a huge plus for the sport in general. So yeah, a lot of really, really good things this year.
All right, so for me, one of my most pleasant surprises, and it's not really shouldn't have come as a surprise, but Scott McLaughlin.
Yep.
I mean, yep. Here's a guy who we know he's a great driver, right? But being great in tin tops, or the Australian supercars, doesn't always translate to success in open wheel racing, where the cars are lighter, faster, brake quicker, whatnot. But the way his rookie season was pretty good, man. You know what I mean? He won a pole, but this year, 3 race wins. He had a little slump in the year there, but overall, so here's a guy who's literally entering next year as one of the championship favorites after just a couple of seasons in IndyCar, and I think this guy's going to be around for a while, and he's going to be, I don't want to say he's going to be the next Will Power or Rick Mears or even Joseph Newgarden, but he certainly has that potential. I really like the way the guy drives. I really like his personality. I really like what he brings to the table. So for me, it was awesome to see Scott get have such a wonderful season. Although it didn't culminate in a championship, he was right there to the end with a shot at winning the thing, right? And then the other thing is Will Power, who last won a championship in 2014, just driving like a new man, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yeah, sure. He had a lot of people say, oh, he had a 1 race season. I said, yeah, but he was on a podium nearly every week. And that's how you put together a championship winning season. And man, hats off to Will Power. Here's a guy who not only took the record for pole positions in IndyCar this year away from Mario Andretti, but sealed up his second championship. So those are 2 very pleasant memories of the year. The bigger surprises, the disappointments, are the guys that went winless this year. Number 1 being Lewis, right? Number 2,
yeah.
Martin Truex. Here's another guy we expect to win some races. And my other big disappointment was Kurt Busch having to end his career not on his own terms. That's I hate it when that happens to a guy, and it does. It reminds me of the same thing with Junior, who really hasn't ended his career because he still shows up every now and again, and Dario, yeah, but yeah. So just seeing some of those guys that you would expect to be kind of in the thick of the hunt every year in and year out, to go winless. A little disappointing.
Yeah, and Truex had a strong season. He just, because of that non-win, he ended up 17th for the final standings due to it.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, because they reset the points when they get into the playoffs. So
yeah, I think as far as collective total points, and that's how I'm going to refer it as, is like, if the playoffs didn't exist, he would have finished like 7 to 8 points. I just view it as a total cumulative amount of points they collected of the entire year. And Truex collected 7th, 8th most points.
Yeah, but even given Martin's record the last couple of years, 7th and 8th is disappointing. Not to mention the 17th that's actually in the record book.
Yeah, no, that is certainly true. That now winning a race, and especially in the equipment like Joe gets racing, is a surprise.
All right, so let's go on with this. What was the race of the year?
Oh,
I know it's a tough one. What was the one that just really took your breath away and since you said, wow?
Oh man, you could have given us some chance to prepare, couldn't you?
I could have, yeah. I don't have a good answer in my head either. So
I genuinely don't either, but I did like the Spring Kansas race where it basically boiled down to Kurt Busch and Kyle Larson towards the very end. I don't know. There's something about that race that I actually liked. It's just how it unfolded stood out to me a lot.
Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah, that was a good one. Yep. Richard, you got anything?
I could say Austria and the F1 front. They're two races. The double header. I thought there was some great moves, some great overtaking there. I'll never forget. They're watching that race because Max won the sprint race on the Saturday, and on the radio, Charles turned around and said, "No, it's okay, guys. We've got him we've got him tomorrow. We'll win the race." And we're all sort of sat there thinking, whatever. He was mild, and hey, Charles was right. He could tell from how the Red Bull was driving that, they would be poor on the soft tire over the weekend, on the medium tire, I think it was, over the weekend. And I thought Austria was probably the highlight of the F1 race. Some of those early races as well, Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia was a really good race as well, with those tussles between Max and Charles. And I really wish we could see some more of those going into next year, that Ferrari can maintain that momentum, and we can have some really, really exciting close battles going forward.
Yeah. So a couple of ones I'd like to point out would be, of course, the crazy scrape the wall Chastain thing in Martinsville. I mean,
that was the best lap of the season. I wouldn't say it was the best race of the season.
Well, you take away the first 400 miles or so, but but that was a really interesting thing. They got a lot of conversation going on, and the IndyCar race at Texas, where Newgarden just nipped the win out of McLaughlin's hands at the last moment. That was another really good one there. But we saw a lot of really good races this year. Colton Herta winning in the wet at the Indy Grand Prix was another real good one. Very interesting race to watch. So let's talk about what was your favorite livery? It's just kind of neat because you got these rotating liveries. You know what I mean? I can tell you what my least favorite was everything McLaren brought to Indianapolis.
With that vomit green,
with that green in there, and I got to see the one car close up.
That was just bad.
But there were some really good looking race cars this year. I did like what they did with Will Power's Verizon 5G car, where they had the red on the front that faded to the black. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, well, best livery car. That's a good question as well, isn't it? I think Penske always produced some good-looking cars. I must admit, you're right on the, some of those black and red Verizon cars. I think were pretty impressive. I thought the one that JGR did for Kyle Busch's final race in the 18 car there was pretty nice. I don't think there's been many standouts, but yeah, I like some of the Penske ones, as you say. The Verizon cars, I think, can often look pretty good. That black and red's always a good look for a race car, isn't that?
It is, yeah, black and red, and the other one of my other favorite color combinations is like green and black. You know,
Yeah.
like if you look back on, say, like Interstate Battery colors. Those that I think that and we've seen that with some other different sponsors too as well. I want to say Graham Rahal had a pretty good looking green and black car this year with one of his because I think Rahal has got the record for most liveries in the season. He's shows up with somebody different every week. I can't remember who the sponsor was, but it was a good looking car.
I think for me would be a couple of the Trackhouse ones actually stood out, like especially any of them that have the red and black colorings. Those always stand out to me. Even the one the McLaren F1 had at Abu Dhabi, that one was probably one of the more better exotic ones they'd done. A 180 compared to the one with the IndyCar program at Indy, completely 180.
Yeah, that was that odd kind of camouflage green was whatever associate sponsor they had signed up with, some sort of a clothing line. I can't even remember what they were called, but I'm like, oh my God. Ugh.
Let's hope if this year's 500 that hopefully I'm there for, the liveries look a lot better.
I'll tell you what, for kind of just simple colors, but a neat little design, Ericsson's Indy 500 car is pretty cool. With the little mountains with the Husky
Any
chocolate,
car that wins the Indy 500 tends to look pretty good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know about Eddie Cheevers or even the years where they were mandated to have like a little box number like their freaking sports cars or motocross bikes.
Yeah. Oh God, Eddie Cheevers, Rachel's potato chips. Yeah. So did you know they pay for that sponsorship in potato chips?
I think you mentioned it once, but
yeah, they mailed 50 cases of potato chips to the team, and they had them as a primary sponsor. There had to be money involved. I don't know. So,
or there had to be. You won Indy.
All right. So, what's the biggest story of the year? Okay, and I'll start this one off. I think the biggest story of the year for me is these couple of different contract disputes. Right, one with, of course, Alex Palou, and the other being with Gasly, right? Or not
Piastri.
Gasly,
Oscar
Piastri. Yeah. So, was this and that in my mind, right? It's significant because it kind of marks a different era for drivers and their agents having a little more power over the teams than they once did, to where we're saying, oh no, we're gonna do our own thing. We'll sue you, you sue me, and in this is kind of common in other sports, where you get the contract disputes and whatnot, but it's been in motor racing before, but not to the extent.
It's been a while since we've seen it, hasn't it?
Obviously, so we're
set up for a reason,
right? So where we have a teams announcing, "Hey, we've signed this guy for next year," and then this guy says, "No, you didn't," and that happened twice within a couple of months. So I think that's pretty significant, and I don't know if that means that the drivers have a little more control over their own destiny. Or that the contracts, the original contracts, aren't worth the paper they're written on.
No, I think there's a bit of both in there, isn't there? I think there's a bit of both in there, but I think for me, obviously, you say the contracts and these contract disputes were pretty fascinating. But I think the biggest story for me was the Red Bull financial infringement for 2021 and how that was handled. I think it really does highlight or reiterate and we've maybe lost it a little bit in the last few years. This whole concept of the Piranha Club, the sort of the nomenclature that was given in the late 90s and early 2000s about the ruthlessness of Formula One. It's all gone a little bit soft over the last few years on the political side, and it's certainly reared its head again a little bit. And to look at what Red Bull were accused of, and how that was handled in the media and by certain other team principals. Not pointing any fingers at Toto Wolff, but it was messy, and as it turns out, it wasn't as bad potentially as everybody made it out to be. It was as much, or the vast majority of the overspend was actually a tax error on Red Bull's part rather than actual overspend. So it was bad and it wasn't right, and they certainly do need to suffer for it, because that's how the sport works, and you need rules for a reason. But it's interesting to see how we go forward with that now and where other teams lay. And I think the more transparency you see in the sport, especially on the financial side, the better it will be, because we need to know why teams have advantages and where the money's going. And hopefully over the next few years, it will start to balance the sport out, and we'll start to see a more level playing field, and it will really kick in.
Absolutely, yeah. So, Louise, your big story of the year?
You mentioned all the big ones. I think I'll stick with the stock car room as the influx of injuries with the current car with these hard hits. I think that was the biggest concern that I had when everything was ho-hum and quiet about why nobody talking about this, why, and when even some of the damages as far as testing is concerned, there was some concerning, because you always want stuff to absorb or dissipate in a car. And in this one, we've seen it from time to time, but not enough in the sense where drivers feel okay. Some drivers said their impacts were worse than they ever had in their entire careers. I look at Chris Buescher's tumble in the 600. What looks like a very minor flip turned out to be worse than some people thought. And then with, obviously, Kurt Busch, Cody Ware, to name a few, that Alex Bowman, that missed races over hard hits with the current car. They got to improve on that. I think with the drivers being very vocal about it, it does help bring a realization that, hey, look, if we don't get it together, these drivers may walk at some point for all we know. And yes, some people will look at the stuff Hamlin or Harvick are saying is, oh, he's just complaining for the sake of complaining, but there's some validity into it in my eye, and I think that to me is the story that stood out a ton. Obviously, the other one is Kyle Busch and Joe Gibbs Racing not finalizing a deal, and we talked about it already multiple times. And I feel like hopefully for Denny Hamlin's case, he does have to go endure the similar stuff that Kyle went through, but time will tell.
Absolutely. So now, generally speaking, before we do the last show of the year, I listened to last year's last show of the year to go ahead and get your guys' bowl predictions for next year, and then see how well that came out. Then I listened to last year's show. Then I remembered that as soon as we finished up last year's show and said goodnight, I said, oh, shit, we forgot to do bowl predictions. So guess what? Let's not forget that this year, okay? So,
I was excited. I had them ready, and then it didn't happen.
I know, right? We did them all. We did them all off air. So, but let's make sure we get those in tonight. We are over our time, but then again, we usually go over our time on our last show of the year. So before we sign off, let's get these bowl predictions in. So next year we can talk about it. So Louise, I'll start with you since you say you got yours ready.
Okay, I got 3. Shane Van Gisbergen will drive a NASCAR race on a national level. 1.
Okay. I don't know who that is, but
Supercar.
Supercar.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. There you go.
So
Nice. That's a good series.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Shane Van Gisbergen will make a NASCAR start. Number 2, Fernando Alonso will actually score fewer points with Aston Martin than he did this season with Alpine.
Okay.
Not a whole lot, but few points. And then finally, I say Colton Herta will finish in top 5 in points with only 1 DNF in the entire year.
Okay, that's
not bold, but okay.
Well, that's sort
the
of
bold
bold,
is if he gets 1 retirement and finishes in the top 5.
That's
so that adds the challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, that's provided Andretti gets their stuff together. So, Richard, bold predictions for next year.
Bold predictions for next year. Let's start with Formula One. Let's have some bold predictions for Formula One. Let's have a think. Lewis doesn't win another race again next year, and George Russell beats him again. On the NASCAR side, Jimmy Johnson wins the Daytona 500.
Okay.
On an IndyCar side, let's have a think. What have we got on the IndyCar side that could be bold?
I've got mine, but I'm not giving you mine.
Grosjean wins a race. I don't know if that's bold or not, but we'll go with that.
Well, I mean, provided again, like I said, Louise and Trinity gets her stuff together. Okay.
Yeah.
So
that's why it's a bold prediction.
So my bold prediction for IndyCar is that McLaren wins the championship. And I don't know if it's going to be Pato or Alexander or Felix, but my bold prediction is that McLaren wins the championship. On the NASCAR side, I really don't have a lot that I will consider bold, but I'll say Ty Gibbs wins a couple of cup races, more than one. And then Formula One, boy, it'd be really bold to say Ferrari gets the championship, huh?
Yeah, it would be that it will require competence.
Well, exactly, yeah, but that's certainly bold.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of who's going to be running it, because there's that rumor of Binotto getting shoved the door for the guy that's at Alfa Romeo.
Vassar.
Yeah, Vassar.
Yeah, I don't think Binotto is going anywhere.
I don't think so, and I think getting P2 probably helped that a lot too, in my book.
Possibly, yeah, obviously the financial reward to that, but I think that a lot of what you're seeing on the criticism of Ferrari strategy is we talked about this. You look at what Mercedes do, you look at what Red Bull do. They've been so good from the performance side for so long that they start to pick off, the higher hanging fruit, if you like. They got all the low hanging fruit down with the performance of the car, so that just leaves teams like Red Bull and Mercedes to be able to go to that next percentile and start picking through these smaller issues. Ferrari haven't had that opportunity. They've been spending so much resources into actually getting the car quick and getting it into a position to compete, that it's like, okay, great, we've got a quick car now, guys, awesome, yeah. Oh shit, now we've got to work out a good strategy. So that'll come. My personal opinion is that a lot of the negativity towards Ferrari's strategy and the management at Ferrari has been very overblown, and that it's something that will be a natural progression, because these things are hard. Strategy is hard. Everybody sits here as a Monday morning quarterback and says, "Oh, they should have two stopped, or they should have gone into wets at this time." I don't think anybody making those claims has ever sat on a Formula One pit wall and had to make that call.
No, they've not had to do it in the heat of the moment. It's always easier to say after the fact you should have.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
I think a lot of criticism that way is very unfair, and I think Binotto's responsibility is to make a quick car, and undoubtedly they did that this year. As I said, the other bits will come. If they hadn't had a quick car and the strategy was good, yeah, his job would be on the line. But I don't think you can question him purely based on strategy.
All right. So to recap,
sorry,
me saying Ferrari will win the championship is an incredibly bold pick. So, and we'll see. I mean, I pulled one out of my butt a couple of years ago when I said if Takuma Sato signs with Andretti, he'll win the Indy 500 in 2017, and I got that one right. So, but anyway, gosh, guys, it's been a great racing season. It really has. We've seen a lot of really cool stuff. We've said goodbye to some legends of the sport, like both the Unser brothers and some others that have passed on. We've said goodbye to the cockpit to guys like Sebastian Vettel and Kurt Busch, and we wish them well in their next steps. We've had a couple of great guests on this year, but mostly I enjoy talking to you, Louise and Richard. I want to thank Mark Dill for coming on today, talk about his book again. His website is markgdill.com. Go ahead and buy his either his adult version of Legend of Super Speedway, or
careful how you describe that.
Okay, the grown-up version, I don't know, or the child's book, right? The adult version, yeah, it sounds like Mark is
X-rated, yeah.
No, well, he said there's a little language in there, so some folks are offended by language, but I'm not. And Mark is a brilliant historian, and he's a great writer as well. And I really appreciated him coming on. So I want to thank Who's the Radio Network, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, and iTunes. But most of all, I want to thank you folks who listen to us. But we're going to take several weeks off. Enjoy the holidays. Happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, and we'll be back around about Rolex 24 time or Daytona 500 time, somewhere right in there. We'll see how things play out, but until then, good night.
Who?